Welcome. My name is Natasha Daniel, and I am the manager of workforce development at Efficiency Canada. Thank you so much, for joining us for a very special Discovery EE celebrating International Women's Day. I am facilitating today from Toronto. Toronto actually originates from the Mohawk word Toronto, which means a place in the water where the trees are standing, which is also said to refer to the wooden stakes that were used as fishing weirs in the narrows of local river systems by the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples. Many of the prominent streets that we walk on today and travel on in Toronto were actually built from the original portage trails used by many Indigenous peoples for many thousands of years. And much like that, the work that we do in energy and energy efficiency is built upon the knowledge and sustainable practice of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Efficiency Canada hosts these Discovery EE sessions every 2 weeks. And these sessions are really meant to bring the sector and people who are interested in energy efficiency together so we can conversate and learn from one another. We try to highlight new research, findings from pilots, relevant topics, and innovations. As I said, today is very special because this session is entitled Women Leading the Charge in Energy Efficiency. And so to celebrate International Women's Day, we have Yasmin Abraham with us. Yay, round of applause. She is the president and co-founder of Kambo Energy Group, a social enterprise tackling energy poverty and improving housing in underprioritized communities. For over 15 years, Kambo has led Empower Me, Home Upgrades, and Community Power, three programs advancing energy justice, deep retrofits, and Indigenous housing solutions. A leader in equity-based energy and climate programming, Yasmin works with governments and utilities across North America to design inclusive solutions that can fit everyone. She serves on key advisory councils and has built a workforce where 83% identify as visible minority and immigrant and/or multilingual, with 59% female representation. Join us as Yasmin shares insights on climate leadership, energy justice, and workforce diversity, along with pathways to thrive in Canada's growing energy efficiency sector, which is now home to actually 436,000 professional Canadians. So, Yasmin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Natasha, thanks for the invite. It's always great to be here, and thanks for that great intro.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming and being a part of this. And I think it's so important for these Discovery EE sessions to also highlight the human element behind our work. And I think a lot of times we talk about the technology and the policy that are happening in these buildings, but people live in these buildings. I was just having a chat with my colleague the other day. And so it's really important to put community and people at the forefront. And you're the perfect person for us to talk to today about
Oh,
that.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think I do agree with you. I think we often in our sector focus on the data and the numbers and the engineering, and that is so important. But there are people behind those numbers. There are people who live in our buildings and work in our buildings, and that's such a critical part of our work. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, let's start this chat. First question. If somebody gave you a green magic wand, it has to be green, of course, because of energy efficiency. What would be the first thing that you would like to do with this fairy dust that you would like to create or change or take away? We'll just start off with a fun question.
Yeah, that's great. That's such a great question. I think going back to my comment that I just made around people, I think often people that we often forget people behind this work, people who live in homes. We work in a very niche corner of this sector, serving underserved communities. And that's all we do. We work with Indigenous communities, newcomers, immigrants, people of color, and low income households. And so our work is very intentional about those people that are behind it. And I think one sort of magic wand piece that I would love for our sector is to really get out of the siloed and maybe historic thinking and approaches we have had to this work and consider, what happens inside a home. We all live in homes. And a home is so much more than just the energy efficiency, but energy efficiency touches so many parts of it, whether it's health and wellness and comfort and safety and affordability. Those pieces of somebody's life impact how you design and deliver a program. So I think it's really breaking some of our historic thinking and approaches and doing something different because these are big problems: energy poverty, climate change, affordability, huge problems. We're not going to solve them by doing the same thing that we've been doing.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that answer because and we haven't really done that before. And I think what you're asking for is a paradigm shift in our approach to the work itself. And if the ideology and the thinking that we put forth in the solutions change, then inevitably the solutions are going to be more equitable at the center of it, right? And it's gonna be something that is more exciting and something that fits into our lives. So yeah, no, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
What inspired you to focus on energy poverty? There's so many ways that we can tackle energy efficiency. I always joke and say how this sector is one where a lot of the unhappy engineers who didn't want to do engineering end up somehow in energy efficiency.
We bring them in.
Yeah, they're just like, come
Oh,
on, all you engineers. But what inspired you to focus on energy poverty and equity-based solutions in Canada's clean energy space?
yeah, I really love that comment. So for us, Kambo Energy Group started 15 years ago. We are a family-based organization. I run the organization next to my brother, Kareem Abraham. And the organization was started by my dad 15 years ago. And he has a history in utilities, a history in energy. But we also come from a family of entrepreneurs and a family of immigrants. For many, many generations, our family has moved around the world and started fresh and started businesses. And the inspiration really came from work for him, working in this sector and seeing these programs being delivered across the country, but also recognizing that the demographics of the participants in these programs did not reflect what it looks like when we walk down the street, what it looks like in Canada. And so really seeing that opportunity and that gap in our sector for immigrants and newcomers to benefit from the program, for programs to be more appropriate and impactful for Indigenous communities, and for programs to be more targeted to the needs of these communities, especially low-income households. So it was really about creating programming that addresses the needs of these communities so that they can participate just like everybody else. And that was 15 years ago, and it's been a wild ride. I joined the company in 2010. I never thought I would work in this sector. My dad asked me to join. We were talking and he asked me to join the company. And I was like, what do you even do? What is energy efficiency? I had no idea. And I just fell in love with the work. I fell in love with the work, with the impact of the work. For me, energy efficiency is the tool to do good. That energy efficiency is not in itself super exciting to me. I'm probably some of those engineers, but it's what it can do. It's the tool that can build better lives, better homes for Canadians. That was a long answer, but
I know that is that's very unique that for Campbell to have this intergenerational story, right? And oftentimes when we think about energy efficiency, we think about it as something that we have to bring newcomers into. We have to almost teach them, but your dad started this as a newcomer to Canada 15 years ago, and I'm sure his international experience helped him be able to fill in the gaps that weren't being filled in.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure he's on as an audience member, so he can jump in the comments and or any of his perspective too.
Absolutely. Hi, Dad. Don't be shy. We have a
Hi,
question
Dad.
period. So you guys have been tackling, Campbell has been tackling energy poverty for 15 years. What
Mm,
gaps in the system led you to create programs like Empower Me and home upgrades? I know one of them was a disconnect between the people that were served and the people that
yeah.
most, I guess, present or more in front of the sector.
Yeah, yeah. Kambo delivers three main programs and services, and each of those programs really address one of the gaps, one of the prominent gaps that we saw in the market, and that we developed based on working alongside the community. So, really checked a lot of our biases and assumptions, and really spent the time with Indigenous nations, with communities to say, what are your needs? Where are you coming from? And how can we help, whether that's efficiency or something else? And so Empower Me is a program that's designed specifically to support immigrants and newcomers. And what we heard over and over in those communities is that they didn't have the education and understanding of the sector of their home that would allow them to participate in those programs. So if anybody here has been an immigrant and come to this country, everything is new. Everything. I always say the schools are different, the houses are different, the milk tastes weird, the cereal is different. Everything is so different. And so many groups that we work with don't have never lived in a home with a furnace before, have never changed a furnace filter. A lot are not familiar with thermostats and how those work. And so there's some foundational understanding and education that's needed in those communities in order for them to be able to participate in heat pump programs. That was one piece. And I think one of the barriers, you talked about barriers, one of the barriers we hear a lot from immigrant and newcomer communities is there's a narrative, I think, in Canada and probably lots of countries that, you know, immigrants come to our country and take advantage of programming, right? And immigrants hear that and they know that. And yet at the same time, we want them to take advantage of this program. So there's a tension there. And so getting through those gaps, the trust challenges, the potential embarrassment, potential shame, and demonstrating why these programs are available. It's not something to be embarrassed. It's not an embarrassing program to take advantage of. Many Canadians do. There's lots of benefits. So really building those trusts between immigrant communities and the sector. The Home Upgrades Program is a program that's being delivered in Alberta and is really a sector-led and community-led approach to reducing energy poverty. It's one of the only low-income retrofit programs in the sector that brings together utilities, local government, philanthropic organizations, the community itself to design a program that actually addresses the needs of communities, which is affordability first. And so the program is specifically designed to address affordability with a really pragmatic approach and holistic approach to that work. And we can talk for hours about that too. And then the last one I'll mention is community power. So community power works directly with Indigenous nations to improve housing. Housing is the most pressing need in the communities that we work with, and we have heard that over and over. And we have found that when you walk into a community talking about energy efficiency, yes, that's an issue. Yes, people understand that if their homes need to be efficient, but you can't walk into a community or home offering energy efficiency without also addressing the broken wheelchair ramp or the roof is leaking or needs an electrical upgrade. It's offering those holistic solutions that address the needs of the community first. So that's all the work that we do and lots more as well. All of our work is really based in community. So we've worked with 100,000 newcomer households. We've worked with over 70 First Nation communities, and we've upgraded 7,000 low-income homes in Canada. And so all of our work is we're in the communities, we're in the homes, we're crawling through crawl spaces, and that really lends itself to pragmatic approaches to addressing these communities.
Sorry, I just want you to highlight again. Can you just say those stats? Because
Yeah, sure. So thank you. We have worked with 100,000 BIPOC households to support their needs in energy and climate. We have worked with over 70 First Nations communities supporting their housing needs, and we have upgraded 7,000 low-income households across BC and Alberta over 15 years. And we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot doing that work. We haven't done everything right. We've made mistakes. We pivoted. It's a journey.
It's a journey. And like you said, it's not to convince people that energy efficiency is the only answer to all of their problems, but that it is something that it is a solution and that this solution packed on with something else is viable, right? And it can really change people's lives. And I love that approach to how you build in community. And what I'm hearing for you, you already answered it really. I was going to ask, what kind of scale are we talking about when you run these projects and these programs? And you've just, told us those very impressive
Yeah.
numbers. Yasmin, I'm guessing that some of the MO behind working with a community as opposed to an individual, there's an each one teach one element, I suppose, that also comes with communities as opposed to individual residents or homeowners or things like that.
Yeah, and that's really where some of our stats about our teams really come from. I think what we have learned is communities who are closest to the challenges are also closest to the solutions, but furthest from the resources. And so bringing those voices into the solutions is so critical. And so that's why our team really represents the communities and your point about capacity building. So everything we're doing is led by the community itself. So when we're working with nations, they're deciding how these projects go ahead and really making sure that we're building agency and sovereignty into that. With Empower Me, we have a small army of energy mentors across the country that represent the communities we serve. I have no idea how the Korean community in Toronto works and wants to receive messaging and the languages we should use from a positioning point of view. But we find the people who do know those communities and we hire them and we train them, and they then go out to their own community and build trust and relationships and community engagement that can then be filtered back to the sector in places like this where we can share what we're hearing about the challenges.
Absolutely. One thing that I just want to highlight as well is the stigma that
Mm,
communities, newcomer communities feel in accessing these grants. It's interesting because people who are in upper middle class tax brackets, it's more of a question of having the time to fill out to make your house more energy efficient, right? Or get that heat.
yeah, find the right contractor. It's so hard. Yeah,
And those
so
are
hard.
real issues, and those are real issues that we talk about all the
100%.
time. But now it's let's actually take it back for a second. It's to even access these rebates and some of these free things, there's a stigma on the folks who are being stigmatized for taking advantage of the system. To be honest, in my years being here, I never heard it framed like
Mhm.
that, and I think it's a game changer to understand then how would we ask Indigenous newcomer communities to be a part of this process if that stigma is already there? They've been stigmatized, by within the
Yeah.
system. Very, very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a stigma, especially for newcomers and immigrants, about taking advantage of social programs. But I think it comes back to educating and providing awareness of why these programs are available. And I think as a sector, we don't really do a great job of that as a whole. You kind of see the messaging of it's the right thing to do, what the climate change, et cetera, et cetera. But there are other reasons why governments and utilities and others do offer these programs. And people are smart, and I think if you can tell them, this is why your utility wants to give you $300 to upgrade your insulation. This is why. So that they feel like, okay, I understand what my utility is getting out of it. And I'm going to benefit, but I think so many of these same communities get scammed all the time. There are so many scams out there. We've all heard of them, seniors and in language scams. And so trust is so important. And you build trust by having authentic conversations with people about what and why we're doing what we're doing.
that's perfect. Another one of my questions is how do you find building trust in communities? But I feel like you've answered that in a myriad of ways. So for those of you in HR, please listen because this is great solutions that we can put into practice right now.
Mm.
Energy poverty, it disproportionately affects women and mothers, newcomers, Indigenous communities in Canada. What are some of the real life challenges that these groups face when it comes to energy access? We talked about the stigma, the stereotypes, language barriers. Is there anything else that you would really like to highlight in terms?
Um, yeah, I think one of the things that we see when we're working with these communities is that everyone we work with, all of these households are trying their best. Nobody is sitting back and being lazy, or there's a lot of narratives out there, but everybody is really trying their best. And trying your best means making trade-offs. And sometimes those trade-offs mean you're not buying the groceries you want to buy, you're not be able to purchase your medication, you're not heating part of your homes. We've worked with families who moved the utility account through the family, including the kids, as it got shut off, and a cycle of utility shutoffs. And there's cascading effects of that. And I think we really know now the health impacts, the mental impacts, the physical impacts of living in a cold or too warm or a too cold house and having that financial stress. But I think programs that target low-income households with retrofits, affordability has to be the number one goal. I think we have a responsibility to drive affordability, and that the important thing, I think, what our experience with delivering these types of programs is how important it is that for the team that's delivering this program, who that team is, their own life experience, their emotional intelligence. There's intersectional society challenges that are within these communities that we work with. We see our team sees a lot of things and experiences a lot of things, and you need a team that has the ability to see the things inside people's homes and still offer a world-class experience for that customer regardless. And that's not an easy thing. We're dealing with asbestos, we're dealing with mold, we're dealing with pest issues. I think we have a whole Slack channel of the spiders that we see in our homes. That's why I can't do that job. But you need the team has to be such a magical herd of unicorns, and it has to really believe in the work that we do. So anyway, I'm really grateful for all of the Cambodians that we call them, who are that magical herd of unicorns.
Absolutely. And it seems like a big qualification. We also have some job openings at Kambo as well that we'll
We
put
do, yes.
in the chat. So if you guys feel like you are called to check out this organization or do some of this work, please check
Thank
out the
you.
links that we will be populating, if not already in the chat. And it's empathy. At the end of the day, we're looking for people who have a skill of empathy. And empathy is not just something that we're born and we just come out of the sky and empathy comes into us. It's a skill that's built like any
Yes.
technical skill that we build, and it can be increased in our lives, so that we can
Yeah.
more, right? It's amazing, your team, and I'm so impressed by the work that you guys are doing. Can you highlight the role that governments and utilities play in solving energy poverty, and where do you see the
Mm.
biggest opportunities for action? Just preface this a bit by breaking down in very simple form for those who have never heard of the term energy poverty, what it is.
Mm. Yes, yes, happy to. So energy poverty is the situation when households have a very high energy bill and very low income. So it's disproportionate. The average Canadian, the latest stats is somewhere around 3%. So we say as a sector, if you're double the average, if you pay more than 6%, that's unaffordable. Similar approaches are done in housing too, in terms of what's an unaffordable housing. And people might have heard that 30%. If you're spending more than 30% of your income on your housing, it's unaffordable. So very similar approach. And so energy poverty has cascading impacts. So people have low incomes. They typically live in really crappy, inefficient homes, and their energy bills are super high. And so that's really this phenomenon where those households cannot access the traditional energy efficiency programs of grants, of rebates, of financing, because those all require money upfront to put in or to go into more debt, which is not a great solution for a lot of people. So that's the overview of energy poverty. To your question about the role that utilities and governments play, I think they have such an important role. And I mentioned our work in Alberta. No one organization is going to solve this by themselves. A government can't do it. A utility can't do it. An organization like ours can't do it. We have to come together to do it together. I think governments play this there's a really interesting opportunity for governments because governments have a social mandate generally around the work that they do. And I think it offers an opportunity to do more than just energy efficiency, which is some of the constraints that utilities have in this work, that they are constrained by their commissions to spend ratepayer dollars in a certain way within certain algorithms and dollars. Governments, I think, can have a social mandate that they can lean on to fill that gap with a utility. Utilities also play a really important role, not only in terms of funding and designing and delivering programs, but they know who their customers are that are struggling the most. They see the bills, they talk to their customers, And shout out to NMAX in Calgary, who's been a phenomenal partner for our program, not only for funding it, but also for embedding the program within their customer care team so that there's this wraparound support. So when they start to get calls about struggling to pay or any sort of signal for them that the home upgrades program might be a solution, they can flag post people over to that program. So it's so much more than just funding, it's actually being integrated into the whole system.
That's fantastic. We actually have a question that really follows up on that from Jim. He says, in Alberta, how do you find funding for your awesome projects, Yasmin? Any particular obstacles here and how do you overcome them? There's no
Um,
obstacles
how do
getting
I find
funding, right?
Yeah, I put on a great jacket and I go walk around the province. It really took us a long time. It took us about 4 years to advocate for the program, the home upgrades program. Alberta is a really unique jurisdiction to do this work. For those of you who don't know, it's the only jurisdiction where utilities can't use ratepayer funds to fund DSM, which is a challenge, but also I think created an opportunity in Alberta to do something different when it comes to low income DSM programs. It created an opportunity where we can pull together actors that I just described to do that. And yeah, we're really grateful to all of our partners, Alberta Eco Trust Foundation, City of Calgary, City of Edmonton, McConnell. I think people who really believed in the work and understood the impact of a program like doing this program differently.
Amazing. There seems to be another funding question as well. We have some folks that are interested in this part. Olfat has a question and comment. I may have missed this, but what kind of funding is out there to support these efforts? These are amazing results. At the end of the day, improving efficiency requires investment from people taking advantage of such programs, and they typically don't have some extra money saved for such upgrades.
Yeah, so all of our programs, Empower Me, the Home Upgrades Program, Community Power, are free to the participants we work with, and they are funded by our funding partners, who we've been working with for many years. With in Community Power, part of our work is securing funding for the nation to deliver the upgrades and to deliver the assessments. So that's a critical part of the work that we do.
I wanted to talk to you too, Yasmin, in terms of the role that an energy trust plays. And do you feel that there's more of a business case for the utilities to have these kind of trust organizations that can then be able to also recycle those dollars and put it towards more community programming?
Yeah,
Or
I think the piece there that's important is the ability to spend money on the things that the community needs now in service of addressing maybe utility goals in the future. So we know that if we can do things like education, teach people how to read their bill, who is BC Hydro or NMAX or Hydro One, why do they care about my utility? Or why do they care about my home and how it's built? That is in service of helping those people participate and drive, whether it's GHGs or kilowatt hours, drive the goals of the utilities. I think it's about, and we talked about this at the start, breaking the traditional way of doing things in service of a long-term approach.
absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm just going to go to one other question from Teresa. Do you have any plans to expand your programs beyond Alberta?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I didn't get a chance to say. We are working in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Washington State, and who knows where else. I think for us, what we see is every community is so different in all of these places, but the approach works. The approach is scalable. And so we are always looking for opportunities to support these communities. Yeah.
Amazing. Coming into this sector, one of the things that really surprised me a little bit was the lack of diversity. Coming from the arts and culture, coming from arts and culture sector to coming into energy efficiency, it was like, whoa, women are underrepresented in our sector. In Canada's, yeah, in the energy efficiency workforce in general. What structural changes are needed to create more leadership opportunities for women in this space, Yasmin?
Yeah, I think I just really resonate with your comment. It is not a very diverse sector or workforce. I think I can count on my hand the number of women of color who really are working in this space. And it's funny, in the last few years, if you had told me 5, 10 years ago, you'll start to get so passionate about procurement, I would have been like, oh, so boring. But I have come to learn and realize how procurement is such an important tool to build diversity in our sector. And it's free. It's a like changing procurement is a free approach. And I think what we have really seen, especially in the US, is where procurement bids go out and almost all bids, so whether it's an evaluation program, a direct install, a low income program, an outreach program, any of the think of all the programs and things that we do in our sector. All of them have a requirement for a certain percentage of the money to be spent with communities who are overburdened. So that what that means is those the big four, the big organizations who typically go after these things, they start picking up the phone and finding the small women-led, minority-led, indigenous-led organizations to make up that 20%. And that has a fundamental impact on what our sector looks like. I think now more than ever, when we are talking about buy Canadian, like really elbows up this whole narrative, procurement is one of the ways that we can do that. And there are certifications in Canada. Kambo is a certified minority owned organization. The organization that certifies in Canada is called the CAMSC. I'm not going to remember what that stands for right now, but check it out. They do a full kind of audit of an organization to really look at where the ownership is, who the ownership is, the demographics of the ownership, and then you get certified. So I think it's leaning into things like that and leaning into procurement that encourages diversity is a really, to me, a no-brainer way to do this. And a market-based approach, right? It really forces the market to step up to that.
Absolutely. It's a great strategy right now in terms of
Yeah.
what we're doing. And not only if you're doing it from an empathetic place, but then also if you're just building a better high performance team. There are numerous reports, and we talked about this in our last discovery as well, that the more diverse a team, the more high performance a team, and the more dynamic solutions that this team is coming up with. So it really is that simple. And on top of it, we are supporting our domestic economy.
The other thing I would say to that is that maybe, I hope it's not controversial, but I don't think it's a coincidence that there is a lack of diversity in our sector and a lack of diversity in the participants of our program. There's a reason that Kambo, as people of color, as immigrants, are focusing on these groups. And so when you have a lack of diversity in the sector, it's not a huge leap to think that we would also have a lack of diversity in the people that we are targeting. And that lived experience and the empathy and the understanding is so critical, whether you're a CEO or a president, whether you're building a website, whether you're designing an evaluation program, whether you're walking into somebody's home, that understanding and lived experience and empathy has a huge impact in who our programs benefit.
Absolutely. Nothing controversial there. It seems like a
Good.
common sense observation, but you know what? Sometimes common sense is lacking. It actually is.
Common sense is not common.
Common sense is not common. We have a few questions here from our chat that I would love to get to before we end our session. David has a question. How do you deal with those that rent and the owner of the building controls the utility? Sorry, how do you deal with those that rent and the owner of the building, I guess, who controls and the utility issues and costs?
Say that one more.
I
How do
think
we
the
work with
question
renters? Is that
Yeah,
maybe?
how do you deal with those that rent as
Yeah,
well as the owner of the building? So you have the renter and then you have the owner.
the
It
landlord.
comes to how the utilities issues and costs are controlled.
Yeah, so for renters, certainly I think lots of talk about split incentives, and that's we haven't solved that yet. But I think with renters, there's a lot of the work that we do is empowering renters and working with renters to help them influence where they can, which is obviously not a huge amount when you're renting and you have a landlord. You really need to engage with the landlord as well. Our programs that do more significant upgrades or and have the mechanisms to do that to protect the renter are programs that we do that we really spend a lot of time with both parties. So really making sure that we are communicating with the landlord, that they know what they're signing up for, that they also feel protected, because landlords, if they have a crappy renter and the renter doesn't pay rent, they need to be able to evict or go through the process that they have. They want to protect themselves too. And for renters, we really want to make sure that the renter knows, that the landlord knows that it's all out in the open, and that we're all agreeing that these upgrades will occur, and that the landlord knows what they are signing up for as well. But I think we have the sector paints a brush of landlords of the bad guys who are trying to renovate, and certainly there are bad actors out there, and not to say that. But I think that green magic wand that you gave me, I would love for us to do a bit more research and a bit more community engagement to really understand landlords a bit more. I read a report a while ago that basically said, I think it was Toronto, that said 80% of the complaints of renovictions in Toronto were by 4 or 5 actors. It's that 80-20 rule. So it's not all of them. There is a few. So I think pulling in landlords into this conversation of how to make it work for them too is certainly worthwhile.
Yes, and sometimes it's the loudest in the group, right? So certainly could be one of those factors there. Yasmin Alfat said Yasmin mentioned 20% of diversity requirement. Where is that required, please? Is it government or private sector? Thanks.
Yes. So and that's a general, you can fact check me, but basically, if you go into the US, if you look at some of the procurement from utilities or state governments, not federal government anymore, but some of the work that's happening down there, majority of those procurements, those RFPs, will have a requirement for at least 20. We've seen 30. And the Justice 40 initiative, which I don't know if that exists anymore, but that had a 40% requirement.
Thank you.
And if anybody wants to see the wording to embed it in their own procurement, send me a note. I will happily send it.
Yes, absolutely. And if anybody needs help getting in contact with
Yeah.
Yasmin, you can just let us know and we'll help you with that. Yasmin, oh, sorry, I already got that. What is Yasmin's company name? Oh, we got you, Jim. Kambo. And Jim also says he's considering writing an article on the work for their client populations. Cool, Jim.
Yeah.
And somebody also wrote, how do we join your team? But Jillian, I believe, has sent in some of those. Terry said that. How do we join your team? But
Just apply.
just apply.
Apply.
There you go. It's good that you're on this webinar. Mention that in your cover letter. There you go. Okay, so we have 3 more minutes left. So last but not least, for those who want to make a difference, whether as industry professionals, community advocates, or policymakers, what is the most meaningful action that we can take today, Yasmin?
Oh my gosh, it's a big question, but I will answer it quickly. I think it's about getting out of our siloed approaches. And one of the ways I would really encourage all of us to do that is to talk to somebody else in the sector. So if you're in government, go talk to somebody in the community organization. If you work for a private organization, go talk to a landlord. If you're in academia, go talk to a private business. Get out of our silos and start to understand the sector from different points of view of what's important to people. And I think that's where we start to have innovation and creativity to solve some of these big problems.
That's perfect. What I am so like I'm a little bit worried about asking you another question. I'm gonna end it there because I think it was so perfect, Yasmin, the perspective you gave today. It's very important for energy efficiency, but I think we can take everything you say and we can apply them beyond this sector in terms of whatever change that we want to create, whether even in our personal life or within our community, right? It's always important to speak. Let's get out of our silos. When you
Right.
go on your feed, all these people that think like you and people that agree with you and people like the same things that you like, but
That's
there's no
right.
growth that happens when you, only reside in an echo chamber of your thoughts, right? And it's very relevant to our sector, it's very relevant to our economy, to everything that we're doing right now,
100%.
so thank you for that inspiration. I feel totally pumped for the rest of my day.
Thanks for the great chat and thanks for inviting me. It's always such a pleasure to work with you and your team. I've been at these sessions since they started and they're great. A great way to launch into the weekend.
Oh, perfect. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. Enjoy.
Yes,
Love up all the
wonderful.
women around you, not just today, but every day.
That's right.
Take care,
Thank
guys.
you.